Welcome to the Killer Psychologist. Today we have a very special guest, Leigh Hunt, a South African born author, crime historian, and broadcaster for the BBC, and an expert in school shootings. He was recently awarded Best New Author at the 2023 True Crime Awards and speaker at CrimeCon UK. He is probably best known for authoring the thought-provoking book I Don't Like Mondays, which is, we're recording this on a Saturday, but it's got me thinking, Monday blues, are they real?
Is that the opening question? Are we off? Are we going?
Yeah, yeah. I
I
started
think they're
looking
real.
in. Yeah.
I don't think people wake up on a Monday really excited about anything. Are they?
So I started looking into Mondays and wondering why I may dread Mondays as they roll around or going to work. And I started looking into some of the statistics behind that. Um, Mondays are the highest rate for heart attacks are on a Monday. The highest amount of coffee consumption is on Mondays, with the average rate of 20% more coffee on this day than any other day of the week. It's when people maybe quit their diet. Uh, so it's interesting that, um, and Mondays are actually also associated with certain other crimes, which I'd love for you to get into um, your book and tell us more about it.
Well, the book, I'm having trouble hearing some stuff, so I'm just going to make a quick adjustment. Sorry about that. Well, my book is really an old tale. I don't like Mondays. I think many people know the song here, certainly here in the UK. The song is very well known. They don't really know the truth of what it's about and why it's such a horrible piece of American history. In 1979, a 16-year-old girl picked up a gun and shot across the street to an elementary school that she used to attend but wasn't attending. Obviously, she was 16, and she shot two adults, nine children, and a police officer in the neck, killing two, the custodian and the principal. Um, Bob Geldof writes the song, and almost immediately, it almost starts off what we know as school shootings. I consider it the first school shooting where a student shot at other students that they didn't know, and that's kind of, again, we could argue about the terminology of what these things mean or what they are, but it certainly was a change in, for me, my American dream. Personally, we moved over as children and come back to the UK, but it's one of those things where when I see that photo, I immediately associate it with school shootings and the dozens and dozens and dozens of them that have happened since. If we look at history, and it's kind of my thing, we've learned very little about how to stop them. Um, our best deterrent is to run, hide, possibly fight back. We actually haven't stopped anything. And sadly, and I know this is an isolated incident, what happened in Uvalde, very isolated with the way that the police behaved. But while I was writing the chapters about how the San Diego Police Department behaved very appropriately and without bulletproof vests, without modern radio, without even 911, they were able to block the shooter, keep her at bay for 6 hours before arresting her without any more gunshots. Whereas in Uvalde, I was reading stories, some true, some not, about how the police officer were running away from the scene while children were still being killed in the school. So, and I know that's an isolated incident. I'm not suggesting for any reason that that's how cops behave everywhere in the nation, or even in Uvalde. But at that moment, at that time, I just felt just. We've learned nothing in 45 years of school shootings in America, and it led me to write a very sort of grim final chapters of the book. I try and chronicle the events as they happen. I managed to get a hold of some information that was not known before. I contacted family. I contacted friends. I became a correspondent with the perpetrator herself. We still communicate now. She has another parole hearing in February, um, and I just tried to chronicle everything that's happened since, looking for some way to understand why it happened, maybe something even small that could help prevent another. I'm getting a bit of flack about glorifying the shooter, and I know that happens, and it's hard to actually get into detail of events like this that are so sad without glorifying something. I think my book does a good job of showing that the police force were the heroes in this event, and that the perpetrator is in prison, and that's probably where she belongs. Again, you know as well as I do that whenever we talk about these difficult situations, it's very emotive for some people. I absolutely know that's very emotive for me as well. The story came to me because my father was the journalist at the Tribune, the newspaper, who heard there were shootings in this small town area called San Carlos in San Diego. Now, if you've been to San Diego, okay, I live in the middle of the UK. San Diego is paradise compared to where most British people live, and I think I'm fair in saying that. To think that shots were ringing out and children were being killed, it was a horrific thing, even for San Diegans. Um, they made phone calls around the neighborhood, and this teenage girl picked up the phone while she was shooting. And in that phone call, they asked, "Have you seen anything going on?" And she said, "Yeah, it's me." And they said, "Well, why are you doing that?" And she said, "I don't like Mondays. It livens up the day." That hit the news. Bob Geldof and the Boomtown Rats picked up the slogan or the one liner. They wanted to crack America. They wanted to be big stars in the world like any songwriter would, and they wrote a song to try and capture America. I think what annoyed San Diegans was that in writing that song and in publishing it and producing it, they released it on the same week that she went to trial. They released the
Mm,
album at the same time that she went to her plea hearing. Cash from cash, but I accept that. Again, I've written a book about the crime. I'm not innocent. I've made money a little bit off of somebody else's pain, and so I'm not innocent on that. Of course, I'm 45 years later, and I haven't lived my entire career off of it. So I think Bob, by doing that, degraded San Diegans a little bit, and I know that we personally didn't like that very much, and I know that America kind of helped us in that. And as a side note, and I know I'm carrying on a bit too much about Bob Geldof, but as a side note, he never had any hits in America. It never really hit anywhere. It was an enormous hit here in Europe, and I think it's a tune that everyone knows around the world, or certainly in the English-speaking world. And it's an enormous hit. And Bob has told many stories about where he wrote it and why he wrote it, which I don't know what the truth is, but I certainly know the truth about the event. My father lived it, and as a 10-year-old at the time that it happened, I was one of the many children around San Diego who very easily could have been a victim that day. Luckily, she chose the school across the street from her house and not my school. And I think since that time, it's one of those things that I carry with me, especially writing about it and studying it. It's the forefront of my mind all the time. So that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I waited 40 years to write it, because nobody touched into it. The FBI has never spoken to her. Um, National psychologists, have never really gone into her mind to maybe find out why she did it. She's kind of been left to the dust, which is probably where she belongs. But as the sort of godmother of school shootings, um, I don't know what could have been learned from her. I don't know. It's not my area of expertise, psychology, but I certainly tried to capture as much of it as I can now, so it's not lost to history. If there's anything to be gained, I think it's just maybe why people do it. But then that's on to you guys. That's my spiel. The book's called I Don't Like Mondays. Um, Part of it is grim reading because children are injured. No children are killed, but children are injured in the reading. But it it's part of the story. It has to be told. It's part of the American consciousness. There you go. I tried to put a brave face on it because it really is grim stuff. And I presented this to in the UK, where they just don't understand guns. And why should they? Why should they? They certainly don't understand the love of guns. And it's even harder to explain why children are given guns, as the perpetrator in this story was given a rifle for Christmas, and just over a month later she's using it to shoot children. So there's a lot in this to unpack for people in Europe, and I've certainly been trying to do my best to try to explain that phenomena and how it came to be and how she's not that unusual. There are probably millions of children in America now who are under 16 who own weapons. It just is what it is.
That's true. There is definitely a different culture. I was born and raised in Northern California, and I was given a gun for my 12th birthday, and I got my hunting license. And we grew up shooting every week, and I know that that is a foreign concept for a lot of people. I don't think that that's the norm. I was raised on in the country on a farm, and personal protection was just something that was, on the forefront of our minds, and also my family were hunters, so they hunt, and that's how we got meat and food and provisions. Um, but I know that that concept for even a child to have a weapon or a, um yeah, uh, what is the 'cause the crime rates for shootings in the UK is I mean,
It's
the United
probably more than you think, actually. Um, Not going into too details of what happens in the UK, but we have our own issues to deal with. We have a knife thing that's going on now. We have a few of our own things going on. People have converted starter pistols into working um, um, handguns. The challenge, I think, and I'm being general here, the challenge is getting bullets that accurately work. We've had a few high-profile cases where people have used different bullets in various different weapons, and they've misfired and hit people who weren't the intended. We've also had examples where, people have had large machinery or large guns from Eastern Europe and been able to get them quite easily and get them into the country. So, look, does everyone have a gun? No. Is it legal to have a gun? No. Do farmers have shotguns? Yeah. But again, the shotgun crime is really, really low compared to the handgun crime around the country, but it is more than you think. And the knife crime is something to really be worried about in some of the inner cities. But again, like America, I didn't go to high school um, or school thinking that I would be shot that day, and it was the furthest thing from my mind. And I think most British people don't think about being stabbed as they walk down the street, but there certainly are sections of communities that carry knives, and it's something we need to deal with, just like America needs to deal with its gun issues. But I don't want to make this sound for 1 second that I'm against the amendment, because I'm not. I'm not. I actually believe in the right to defend yourself and the right to bear arms, and I carry that as I'm a passport carrying American, a surrogate American, and I believe in that. I just think there's somewhere in between where we could be more logical about how we deal with that problem that comes with it.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that, and I agree. I think that obviously this is embedded in the Second Amendment to our Constitution, and certainly the United Kingdom doesn't have that provision, right, in statutory law or in any sort of case law, right? My understanding is that there's a very strict restriction on guns in the
Mhm.
United Kingdom, and that you can have them for either like hunting purposes or like in farms and that kind of stuff. But
It's actually more
it's
restricted than that. It's
it
actually
is.
more. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that, and again, I want to point out that the majority of people who are gun owners in the United States are law abiding. They are norm conforming. They don't have ill intentions. Um, I think the difference is because we can look at other countries that have high per capita gun ownership. So Switzerland is one example of where there's certainly all age bearing or adult men are expected to have a rifle because they have their own sort of militia, their own voluntary militia. But there's a cultural piece here that I think is driving a lot of this in the United States, and it's multi faceted, obviously, in terms of why we're seeing the increases that we're seeing in gun violence. But you bring up an important point, which is you talked about the knife violence that's happening kind of in the larger cities in the United Kingdom and in other countries where gun control is in place. And so I want to point out that I think so that speaks to the issue of you're not going to stop violence in terms of restricting guns necessarily, because generally what will happen is that the actor, the person who wants to perpetrate violence, they're going to find another modality, right, to enact that violence. So whether it's the use of a knife or it's the use of a vehicle, for example, where they're going to go and they're going to plow down people and crowds and those sorts of things, you can certainly inflict mass, casualties just by running. We've seen this, right? Running people down in, at parades and things like that. So, yeah, I don't want this to be about, like talking about gun control, but there's a deeper issue. There's a deeper societal issue that I think is at play that drives a lot of this in the United States specifically. And I think individualism has something to do with it. Like listen, our culture here in the U.S., like we have such an individualistic culture that I think that plays a little bit of a role in this as well. We're seeing kids today becoming more and more sort of isolated. They're not. There's a lack of community, so the sense of community is sort of breaking down in the United States. And so I think, I don't know, Dana can speak to some of the other psychological factors that are probably playing a role in what we're seeing here. I dealt with this for 28 years of my previous career in law enforcement, as a police officer, and I can tell you that the amount of the desensitization to violence has really increased over the past 20 to 30 years in terms of the media that we see. If you look at the amount of violence perpetrated in popular media, movies and things like that, there's a desensitization component to this. The gaming technologies that are now so realistic, where you're in Mortal Kombat, you're doing you're killing hundreds of people virtually. There's a certain desensitization that comes with that, I think, and I think that's also playing a role. And so when you have that and you give like we say, access to weapons is quite readily available in the United States. There's more guns than there are actually citizens in the United States right now. There are actually more firearms. There's more than one firearm for every person in the U.S. So that's notable, right? Because I don't know that there's any other country that probably has that.
You've touched on an interesting point there, and I know Dana, you want to pipe in here because I think it's your knowledge that we're here to listen to. But you touched on something that was really really interesting about video gaming and other things, because there's a few chapters in my book about the Alice Cooper issues. Of course, as soon as the perpetrator took to shooting a school, of course, Alice Cooper had an enormous hit in the early '70s called "Schools Out." And immediately they jump on this musical thing, whether it's Ozzy Osbourne or others, or Dungeons and Dragons, which was enormous at the popular role play in some form, was a big discussion for a lot of parents, and they were almost certain that this desensitization, and again, you guys know more than me, um, set off their biorhythms. This is the 1970s, guys, where you know they didn't understand reality from fantasy, and because Alice Cooper then suggests this in an alternate universe, and you're doing role play as a third level paladin, that you have a weapon, and SWAT television show was really popular at the time, and crime shows were having significant impact on children. So all this stuff plays in. But what is the most interesting part of it is that when she's asked to quote, when she's asked why she does it, she ends up using one from Garfield the Lazy Cat, which is "I don't like Mondays," which shows how much of a child she was. And there's also a little known part of this crime that I find really fascinating, is that she used the rifle, the 22, that her father gave her for Christmas about 35 days earlier, which was marketed as your wife's weapon, as your starter gun, as your child's 22, which was more than three-quarters her height, right? And she took her pellet gun, which she'd had for the last 10 years, which she had shot very, very well and proven to her father that she was a good shot, earning the right to a larger weapon. So she shot both. I'm not suggesting she's innocent. I'm not suggesting that. But it is a very interesting thing to fire a pellet gun as well as a 22. Um, I just don't know her ability to understand what she was doing that day. Certainly, she's where she belongs, in prison. I'm not suggesting she doesn't. She doesn't belong in prison. But it is an interesting thing of her age and shooting the pellet gun, aiming directly at the children in their arms and legs, but aiming at the adults in their chest or neck. There's something in that, and I would just love. I don't know what the answer is, and I think we could search forever. but did Alice Cooper play a role? What you know what was the reason? And we're still searching.
I was trying to find, in researching for this episode, I was looking at, out, and again, sometimes you have to be cautious about, looking for data and information on the internet. But I was looking to see, because what we do as forensic psychologists, and Dana will speak to this as well, is like in a case like this, sometimes, and it didn't look like it happened in this case. Issues of mental health, are going to be looked at, both in the pretrial proceedings, but also during the trial. So we have different mechanisms for this. We have, mental status at the time of the offense, which is a, criminal responsibility analysis. And you actually have that in the United Kingdom. In fact, all of that comes from English common law. And so I didn't see that the defense team had pled that. In other words, they didn't try to argue, at least unless I missed it somewhere. They didn't assert an NGRI defense for her. I looked to see, was there any psychological evaluation done during or prior to the trial? I didn't see evidence of that.
Well,
Afterwards, I
well,
did.
again, she pleaded guilty in the
Okay, yeah,
last, but the reasons why she did, and we can get into this. This is the 1970s California. It was a
yeah,
strange time, and the way they determined who was, and again, she was 16, so they changed the law to try her as an adult. So there's a number of things going on. No, she was never really evaluated for her psychopathy, if that's the right words, as you would expect. And there was no invasive trial because the family didn't want people to know what was going on in her family. And she plea bargained and actually got herself a raw deal by plea bargaining.
yeah. She
She's
got
in
25
prison.
to life, and she's still in prison.
It's which is really weird because even the guy who prosecuted her said, "Let's see how she is in 35 years. She'd be out by now,
Sure.
mandatory." So she made some bad decisions all the way through, from start to finish. From the moment she received that weapon, there's a series of poor decisions. Um, Yeah, interesting. Sorry, interesting. I digress, but you raise lots of fascinating points about this particular case and the truth. Because when you have the first school shooting in American history, and again, I'm not going to argue that point, but you have one of the first school shootings in American history, nobody wants her to be innocent. Nobody wants her to be mentally ill. Nobody wants her to have any justification whatsoever for what she did. And I don't think she does, but they made very, very sure that she was banged to rights and guilty. Even the police investigation that went into the home after she surrendered, they said, we don't even have to do a full investigation. She's banged to rights. She confessed on the phone. So
Yeah,
there was never even a
yeah.
full investigation. And that's why I think I needed to write the book, because let's go back and look at this. It's not that different a story from some others. And I don't think there's that many similarities between school shooters. I'm not suggesting there are, but there are a few touch points where you go, hold on a second. Hold on a second. Oh, wow. Okay, that's interesting. I
Well,
don't
we
think
like
I'm
to look.
in, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Go. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I don't think I'm not an FBI profiler, nor would I attempt to be, and nor do I
Yeah,
think all
that's
that is
it.
correct. But still,
Yeah, you're right. And so that profiling is not an exact science, but
yeah.
one of the things we do, and I looked at some of the background, her sort of background, and clearly, she didn't come from a, like a stable family environment. I could see that from what I had looked at, and so those are things we definitely look for. One of the things that was interesting is that there was evidence, at least this is what's reported, that she mistreated animals. And I bring this up because, and I don't know if you have support for this or not, but that's what I saw this, and again, I don't know, I can't confirm it because I don't know. But when we see children, particularly, like younger children, torturing animals, this is a huge red flag. And it goes beyond just like, say, hunting or anything like that. We're talking about the torturing piece. That's a big red flag for us as
Can I
psychologists,
weigh
because
in on
we
this?
start, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
Okay. Now I love that bit, because that is Jeffrey Dahmer 101, right? And for anybody who's a true crime fanatic, and that's where I begin on this, was just the love of true crime before I went to my criminology stuff. And, everybody picked up this book and wants to say they were in the military, they were bedwetters, they hurt animals. Okay. Now I knew all that about Brenda. And sorry, I've said her name. I shouldn't have. I knew all that about her going in as a San Diegan, that she hurt animals. I specifically went to all the people who said that in the newspaper and asked them, and all of them said they made it up. I've got
Ah.
dozens of photos of the perpetrator with animals, loving animals, and in
Hmm.
fact, my first correspondence with her was sending her photos of my animals, in which she responded, says, "Really cute animals, I love them." And then I said, "Well, didn't you hurt animals?" And she went, "Why would I do that?" So I think that might be one of those pieces where it makes people feel better knowing
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
as even though it isn't accurate, or I don't believe it to be accurate, but she did certainly tell me that she shot at pigeons, and often when they went to the hills with her pellet gun, she would shoot at the gophers.
Oh, it just
So
froze a little bit there.
make that what you will. But certainly the people in the newspaper who reported that she hurt animals all said, "Well, I don't know that. I just heard that from someone else." And one of them even said, "I made that up."
This is
So
why I love talking directly to the source so we can
Yeah.
sort out this information. And that's one of the things that we've had a lot of discussions about on this podcast and just between colleagues. There gets to be a lot of misinformation through the media, and it can change our perception of the entire event or what we think about this person or what we believe is justice for her. And sometimes we just get it wrong. And there's a lot of information out there on the media that's presented, and it it shapes everything of what we think who this person is. Um, what if she were to be released, right? She, who, how would she be accepted in society? Or, can people change? I find it unfortunate that in any case like this, that an individual, especially an adolescent, isn't appropriately psychologically evaluated. That's really important.
Brenda was one of
Yeah.
those
I mean, that's,
lock her
yeah,
away,
but
throw away the key types.
yeah, but this is like you said, this is the late 70s, and back, again, in the late 70s, there was less sort of awareness in this domain, I think, in terms of really trying to, flesh out what was going on with this person psychologically. That wasn't really the emphasis back then. I think there's certainly more emphasis on it now, but that's
You know,
unfortunate because, yeah, we don't,
yeah.
that could be a mitigating. So there's reasons why you would want those evaluations done, at least, if I'm speaking as an attorney now. Like, if this was my client, I would certainly want them to be evaluated if I thought that, there was mitigation, meaning that if there was a severe mental illness potentially that could have been impacting, this, her behaviors. um, I might want to use that, because sometimes that can be used in mitigation phases of a sentencing, for example, not
And I think it
necessarily,
was, whilst in prison, while in jail or juvenile hall in San Diego, a number of things happened where it was determined that she was having seizures in her sleep, which was something that was never previously diagnosed. So they go down that rabbit warren of did the seizures lead her to, again, go into an alternate state of mind? Do you know? She claims she was on PCP when she did it. Um, just so happens in 1979, PCP is the only drug they couldn't test for. Her toxicology report, just by coincidence, her toxicology report comes back as negative for any drug. PCP is a very expensive drug in 1979 for a 16-year-old to buy. She had no money. So, you know, logic would tell you there's a bit of BS there. I'm not suggesting she wasn't on drugs, although her talks came up clean. I'm not suggesting some other things. She claimed 20 years later that her father interfered with her,
uh
and that he wanted her dead, and this was her reaction to that. um Again, I'm not going to suggest that anyone would lie about such a thing, and her father did turn out to be a mega creep in what happens in the aftermath, which would lead you to say, there's something there. On the other hand, there's a sister and a brother who, you know vividly deny this. And even the father is almost believable in the way he says, well, that didn't happen. But yet his actions would lead you to believe you're not a good person. So it leaves us out there. And of course, you guys will know as well, there are millions of people around the world who have had very unfortunate early parts of their life who don't go and pick up a weapon and shoot people they don't know. So again,
Yeah.
are we back to square one? My book kind of leads me back to square one by the time it's over, because I don't know what we conclude, but there we are.
Yeah, you bring up the seizures, which is also important to talk about. And again, this is her self-report, but I'd also seen that there was a report that she potentially had a head injury from a bicycle accident at some point during her childhood. And we do look at that because traumatic brain injuries can lead to personality changes. They can lead to, you can. There's a famous case of this is from late 1800s, Phineas Gage, where this is a railroad worker who had a tamping rod that went through his orbital frontal. It went right through essentially through his eye, and took out his part of his frontal lobe. And this guy turned into a monster, but he changed dramatically and became this really agitated, irritable, and I don't want to use a descriptive language, but nobody wanted to be around him. Let's put it that way. He was very difficult after that. So these are things that we would want to know about as well. And this is sort of the again, this would be pretrial stuff, and it may not necessarily explain everything, but um, it could be a factor that that maybe was overlooked.
Yeah, and the case of that is really interesting. She hits her head. The mother decides not to take her to the hospital. She says, "Well, the dad has got custody. He can do that." Dad does nothing. It's not for a couple of days later till the sister takes her, and so maybe not just the head injury, but that identification. Again, your area of expertise, but it is an interesting point. But again, millions upon millions of people have head injuries similar to that and do not do what she did. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's this is the thing with trying to explain behavior like this. It's oftentimes sometimes we don't get to an answer. We just don't
Yeah.
know, right? But I think there are some factors that probably contributed to this, and I think some of it has to do with that environment that she was in. It and I don't know about the abuse, but if let's assume if abuse was occurring, that can have devastating impacts on a child in terms of both desensitization to to violence as well if you're being sexually molested.
Yeah. The
So yeah,
70s
there's a lot.
70s were a strange time as well. Just that weekend, there was a woman who hijacked a plane in Los Angeles demanding to speak to Charleston Heston. The Manson sisters were still in the news every week. Patty Hearst had just been exonerated and released, weeks before.
Yeah,
There were, and I bring that up because for those who are old enough to remember the 1970s, and if you were there and you remember it, you probably weren't there, if you know what I mean. The
yeah,
70s were kind of a time. It was a groovy time, man, and stuff was
right.
happening. And Brenda is one of these stories of the 70s. She interestingly goes into prison and becomes best friends with two of the Manson sisters. So it's a bizarre, they're the grandmothers of the prison. You know,
Yeah,
it's a real interesting thing how she. I'm not going to say she admired them, but she certainly knew who they were when she went to prison. And they have cells, or they actually call them rooms, across the hall from each other. And they've been,
wow.
for Brenda, lifelong friends with Manson sisters.
Yeah, I think one of the Manson sisters that came for parole recently and got
Yeah,
denied.
she's out.
Is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, one of them is out.
Oh, one of them did
Um,
get out.
one of
Yeah,
them got
yeah.
out
One
in,
of them.
in parts unknown. I think we actually know where she is. I won't say it, but Brenda looks to go and join her soon. In February, she has another parole hearing. I don't think she's ready to go, but you guys, and I spoke to Dana already about this, about what happens in California and these new
Yeah,
Franklin hearings that are going on.
yeah,
In 2 weeks' time, Charles Andy Williams, who was a shooter in San Diego as well, who was 14, is up for parole. And I think that's a very different story. The 2 years difference between their ages and the crimes, even though similar in the same county, I think he has a very good chance to get out on parole.
hmm,
And I would say that he's done an awful lot to work towards that. And I would even suggest that the groundswell in San Diego would say, hey, you know what? Let's give this kid a chance. And parole might be the best option for him. And I tend to agree with it, actually. Whereas Brenda hasn't shown much remorse. She's a real case of arrested development. She hasn't really taken up programs in prison. The women's system is not. It's not. I'm not going to suggest it's worse than the men's system, but it hasn't really given her the opportunity to rehabilitate. And I don't know if prison can ever get. Anyway, look, Dan, I really want to hear what you got to say about that because I know you've got an opinion on this subject. So I'll leave it there. But I've given you enough to think about.
Well, Craig and I have talked a lot. We were talking about this recently of why they should do psychological testing so you can decide, where to place people in prison and the correctional system, right? To separate them, who is amenable to treatment. And I we do evaluations on adolescents in juvenile hall. I've assessed, people that have committed serious crimes like murder. And the reason why they need a psychological evaluation sometimes is it's very specific. It could be for a transfer hearing or a number of, should they be tried as an adult or different factors. One of the questions that comes up for me is, if Brenda had legal representation right now, an attorney that could present some of these mitigating factors to the parole board of her psychological state, all these things, even some of the reasons why it didn't go to trial, like if she was being abused and sexually, kind of reminds me, I think of the Mendez brothers, or if she had a TBI or seizures or abuse, maybe that's why the family was quick to uh, not want it to go to trial because these other things come out, right?
That's you've hit the nail on the head. At the same time that she was going to trial, or trial would have happened, her father was dating. Okay, let's say this. Let's say this as easily as I can. Her father went to visit her in juvenile hall and struck up a relationship with her cellmate,
Mm.
who was younger than Brenda. Brenda was then 17. She was 16-year-old.
Oh.
She was moved to an open facility where he helped her essentially escape an open facility, where he knocked her up whilst pregnant.
Wait a minute.
Oh, wait,
Yes,
what? No.
yes,
What?
yes. Factual. While pregnant, he went to the mother, the minor's
Girl's mother.
mother. Her
Yeah.
her name is Sheila McCoy. Went to the mother and said, "Look, I can take care of this girl and take this horrible teenager off your hands. I just need to marry her." So they all drive to Arizona, where you only need one adult signature to marry under 18, not two adults signatures, two parent signatures. So they drive to Yuma, Arizona on the border. And anybody from San Diego knows it's about a 3-hour drive,
Yeah.
right?
Close. Yeah.
So you drive, hop the border, get married. The mother of the minor is the witness and the stepfather. They drive back to California, where the police knock on the door and say, "Hey, we're getting reports that Brenda is back," because she looked so much like Brenda. Sorry, I said the name again. Looked so much like his daughter that the neighbors thought this is not a lie. This is factual. And there are newspaper reports to back this up. And many of the locals know this. They talk about it today. Anyway, they have a child
And
whose name is, go ahead,
how old was she when he impregnated her? How old was she? Do you
16,
know? Okay.
just turned 16.
Well, it's obviously still a crime, right?
It wouldn't be in the UK, but it is in the United States.
Right, not in the United Kingdom because the age of consent 16. Yeah.
And more importantly, he knew it was a crime because he went and did the shotgun wedding in Arizona.
Yeah.
So and then because it was his wife,
No
the
pun
DA,
intended for shotgun wedding.
yeah, exactly, yeah, sorry, yeah, because it was his wife, she can no longer turn testimony.
State.
So
Yeah.
the
In other
police
words,
said,
the
"We'll never get
privilege.
this. We'll never get this." So they just walk away from it. But the neighbors see her. That
Oh my
child
God.
ends up going to a daycare school and hobnobs with some of the victims. So the community kind of moves on, and it's really, really bizarre. One of the victims ends up working in a child care center. As that child grows up and becomes an 11-year-old, she ends up being the daycare helper for this child, whose name is Bree, who still owns the house, the same house. He spent the rest of his life living in that house. Sheila McCoy disappears about 4 years later, never sees her daughter again. Brenda hates Sheila because she went with her father. Uh, You know, look, you want a weird story? This is it. This is really weird.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this could be certainly a made into a movie. I mean, it's I
And we can even go further because the attorney who represents the victims sues the father, his home insurance, because she shot from inside the house.
in the house.
The
Yeah,
crime,
yeah.
yeah, the crime
Yep,
happened
yep.
from the house. So they sue his home insurance, and his name is Broderick. 10 years later, he's shot in his bedroom with his new wife, by his ex-wife, Betty Broderick. Right? Okay, stay with me. Stay
Oh
with
my
me.
God.
Who then goes to prison for murder, is not apologetic, becomes almost what is it? What's the TV show? Dirty John series 2 with Christian Slater. Christian Slater plays him in the TV show. She goes to prison, gets a cell block about 6 doors down from Brenda. Neither of them know this. They now know it now because I've written to them and spoken to them, and they're not friendly. They are not friends. Just
No.
they do not like each other at all. Right? But their connection is through this man. One of them sued her father, the other one's she murdered. So San Diego, as even though it's a big city and we know it, and I love it, it's my surrogate home. I love San Diego, but wow, it's a really weird tale that just twists around in circles. And yeah, there you go. It's all
Now
in
I
the
can
book.
see. Yeah,
Yeah,
now I can see why you describe the father in this way. I mean, this is yeah this and again this would support this sexual abuse uh, allegation, obviously because of the behavior. I mean, this is clearly his preference. If this is all true, right, is for younger women, underage women.
but she's waited a long time to bring that information up. I mean, if she had, and I'm again not suggesting it isn't the truth, but she does have this weird love-hate relationship with her father. She was angry at Sheila for taking her father away, which again is, you know better than I do, but I think it could be consistent with someone who's a victim. On the other hand, I just don't know. I just don't know. As a historian, I try and list the facts and put them out and let other people decide who are smarter than me because I'm only good at reading and rewriting. The stuff in between, I get really caught up on. Let you guys decide.
Well, going back to the psychological testing that Dana was talking about, this is again, I worked in the prison system as a psychologist in the California prison system for some time. And what I can tell you that we don't do well still is that we don't do a good job of figuring out who is amenable to treatment and who isn't. Now, there's a reason why I bring this up. It's very important. I think the viewers need to understand this. And it's important for us to figure out if the person in front of us, are we dealing with a psychopath here, or are we dealing with somebody with other psychiatric illness, which is different than psychopathy? Psychopathy is a completely different construct. When you're dealing with a psychopath, if that's the case, we have to approach it completely differently because oftentimes psychopaths, well, most of the time, they're not amenable to treatment. We're not going to get movement, and that's why it's important to figure that out. And I'm not implying that that she's a psychopath, but nobody ever like explored that. It didn't look like I didn't see it. I mean, perhaps there was a forensic psychologist that's familiar with the PCL youth for because we have a test that we use to figure out whether somebody meets criteria for being a psychopath or not, and it's a semi-structured approach and it's a valid way to do it. But we don't do that, and it's really a disservice to everybody because we can't figure out who we should be treating and who we shouldn't be treating because resources are finite, right? And we can't give unlimited sort of like psychological treatment to everybody. I mean, it would be in a perfect world, that would be great, but they can barely get, in the prison system in California, you can go go online and go to any of the the job sites. You will see open positions for psychiatry, psychologists, because people burn out when they go in there because it's an overwhelming environment. And I saw that firsthand. And I saw a lot of inmates who yeah, they're in front of me, and I got a psychopath in front of me, and they're in the mental health delivery system, and we're giving them standard treatment, like standard psychotherapy and things like that. That's not appropriate. We should not be doing that. So it's just, I wanted to point that out. It's, and back in the early 80s, and when she started going through the system, they hardly had any mental health treatment in the prison system at that time. So that was the reason why all the big lawsuits got filed in the 90s, because of the lack of appropriate care. And it was bad. They didn't have access to appropriate mental health and or medical care. It was substandard. It wasn't at a constitutional standard. And so that's why all the federal lawsuits were filed and everything. And the prisons are still dealing with that today, like trying to get all the mental health staffing up to par. But again, we don't. And Dana can speak to it as well. We don't do a good job right now of figuring out who needs the help, who really needs the help.
Well, and I'll comment on that. Um, there's we need a larger budget for this, for forensic psychologists to do these evaluations, and we are appointed. We do this as our job, but we're not doing it enough. And a lot of times I'm told it's because of the budget. Who wants to pay for this evaluation, especially when it comes to indigent folks who are using public resources like the public defender? They don't have the finances to hire a defense attorney. So the court appoints me from the Superior Court, or maybe probation appoints me. It's typically the court, and other agencies don't want to fork out the budget to do these evaluations. Recently, I did an evaluation on a female individual from a small county, Del Norte County. I'll just mention the name, but that public defender had been waiting for 2 years to request a psychological evaluation for this female who had done some very violent acts. And yes, she'd been being abused in the home, and a lot of things were going on. She should have been evaluated closer to 2 years ago. By the time I got to her, there was already more crimes. Her crimes had increased in frequency and severity, getting to, you know, um, you know, by the time I saw her, she was assaulting staff every day, right, in the juvenile hall, and wasn't even safe for transport. So having these evaluations is so critical. And so by the time we're evaluating, sometimes it's, where are they safe to be housed, and who can even keep them? These are minors, right? But doing an evaluation is so important. And I really wish I would see more. I would like to be doing more of these earlier on, because by the time I'm seeing them, the reality is they've already murdered someone, right? And I'm assessing them for something else, like insanity or competency or a number of other things. And I always go back in my mind, because I get all the records, and we look back through rewind time, and we see all those factors that are there that went unnoticed or undetected, the abuse. And yeah, oftentimes there really is some sexual abuse in the home, or in, you know, they didn't get appropriate intervention. And I know the school system in general, you have school psychologists. Um, their job is very specific, and they don't,
It's
they're
educational
not,
assessment. Yeah, they're not looking at, yeah.
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
not
yeah.
their job. And so I wish that the school system was set up differently. There was people like us to interact with students and have these opportunities for students to come forward. They are being abused. No one's reporting it, because
If
who?
we, yeah, not to jump in too much, but there's this mass assumption that she was abused, and I've written this story in with the discussion that she wasn't. It isn't until she announces that she was that you can then go back and reflect and look. But I, I struggle with this issue, because I don't want to tell someone, you're not telling the truth is something that's so sinister and so horrible. And the father is a mega creep. Um, I'm struggling with the evidence to say she was abused. I'm struggling with any evidence
Her state, yeah, what she's
her statement
her statement, yeah.
and dad's a creep. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, it's circumstantial evidence. I mean, it's like from a legal standpoint, we look at it as circumstantial. Now, direct evidence would be like we have, biologics. We have
yeah,
evidence that she was, raped or by him and all that. Obviously, we're in many sexual abuse cases, we're not going to find it because it's usually years later when it's discovered or it's revealed. But certainly, what you just when you told us about, or when I heard that he had and married this underage girl, that right there is like, whew, that's persuasive, right? It's
very.
circumstantial, but it's persuasive. It is.
And that news was in the newspaper. That was happening then.
Yeah, so it's a factual. There's probably a record, right? There's going to be a public record of this and everything, so we can
Yeah,
verify
and
this.
it's easily traceable.
Yeah.
But yet she says nothing.
Well, I
Her
can't
lawyer,
help but
her lawyer says nothing.
Wow. Wow.
So I don't know. I don't get it. I just don't get
but
it.
you can also, weigh the risks and benefits of disclosing certain information. And I can't help but mention the Mendez brothers again because that information didn't come out till after the parents were murdered. Then, right, there's
Came
further,
became a defense strategy. Yeah, of course.
but then for trial, I understand it was, suppressed from the jury to have that information that they were sexually, physically abused. And that was a large component of why they were so rageful. But in the end, like that wasn't a factor in their sentencing. And of course, they're serving a life in prison. And a lot of people say, well, boy, things would have been different had that been introduced to the jury. So this conversation we're having is so important because before you take a plea bargain, right, before you
Yeah.
waive your right to a jury, before you go, sit down with someone to talk about all your
Can I
rights.
can I make this story a little bit deeper? And maybe this will be information you know about the California prisons. But Brenda claims, and many other females also claim, that during their trial phases in the state of California in the 70s and early 80s, they were drugged because of hysteria. It's a huge issue, and it's come up from a lot of places, and it's reared its head a bunch of times. She claims, yeah, that because she was misbehaving in juvenile hall, that she was drugged and therefore didn't make correct decisions.
So yeah, there would be. I mean, again, if they're giving her a benzodiazepine, so the drugs that we're probably thinking about here at that time would probably be benzodiazepines and things like that, or depressant type drugs. So
She
there'd be a
claims that
record of.
she was claiming she was given loads of seizure meds, far more than normal, and it kept her docile.
Yeah, and
And
seizure
that's why
medications can sedate. Yeah.
she behaved the way she did whilst in trial, and she behaved exactly as they expected her to, which made her look not remorseful, made her
Very
make bad
very
decisions.
flat. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
very blunted.
Now, there is a lot of evidence to say what she's saying happened. There is not much evidence to say what she's saying happened to her, because I find her at 63 to be exactly as she was as a 16-year-old, docile, without much emotion. So,
Yeah.
so
You.
you still on these drugs? Look, she's a bad person. What she did was terrible. Do I think she's a threat to society now? No. Do I think she could get out of prison tomorrow and go kill somebody? No, I don't believe that. She is she is 60 something. She has no teeth. She can barely see. She's obese. She's horribly diabetic. If you can be horribly diabetic, she's a case for don't be diabetic. I don't see her doing anything to harm anyone but herself. Um, you know, again, I'm not glorifying her by what she did, but she served an awful long time. People have done worse crimes and served less time. But she is the poster child for
Yeah.
I don't like Mondays. for the rest of her life. And I put her face on my book, and she'll never ever be forgotten for what she does, for what she did, even though she looks nothing like the photograph on my book. I just don't see her as a risk anymore. And I think personally, let's start investigating her because she's still the exact same 16-year-old who went to prison. It's arrested development. I know it's probably not a technical term, but it's one I've been using because it's the only one I got. You guys tell me a
Well,
more scientific name.
yeah, that's a psychodynamic sort of way of thinking about, maybe what happened here, right? So when this is, I don't want to get too deep into the dynamic theories of, like psychosexual development, but if, when children are abused, and those experiences are generally very adverse, they can lead to developmental blocks. We call them psychosexual blocks, but it can then lead to later, pretty significant problems adjusting, and I know she didn't make it to adult life necessarily because she was in, she went to prison, but there's something to be said about that in terms of, from a psychological standpoint. If there was this abuse going on and it was, repetitive, absolutely could contribute to this, this emergence of lots of different sort of personality pathology can emerge from that. That's why it's like, we would love to have the opportunity to evaluate her and give her, like, we know exactly what kind of testing we would do, and it would give us information about, well, let's rule out the psychopathy piece, because even though women are less likely to be psychopathic, we have evidence that,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
there's not gender equivalence in psychopathy. Obviously, men outnumber women in this domain, but we want to rule that out, right? And then also look at, well, if that's not what it is, then what is going on? I don't know that that's ever been done, in terms of like the testing and all of that. I don't know if anyone has formally tested her.
She's undergoing a number of different psychological evaluations for her Franklin hearings. Now,
Yeah. Okay. So
for those who don't
yeah.
know, outside of California, Franklin hearing, and again, you guys correct me if I'm wrong here, there was a famous case of someone named Franklin who was I believe 25, 26, who committed some crimes, who said, well, because of my age, and again, in their 20s, um, I should have some special compensation for my time because I was so young. Now, most people who are going the Franklin route are teenagers. There are some who, being unsuccessful, are a little bit older. Brenda being 16, there are other school shooters who were 13, 14, even one that's 19 that is doing the Franklin hearings. And there's a series of evaluations that are being done. It's all kind of secret squirrel stuff. Not much of it's being released. And trying to get that information out of the state of California is very difficult. It's a bit easier in Texas, even Florida offers the
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
Um,
It's going to be very hard in California, like, especially anything
yeah,
related to parole and corrections.
and
I'm yeah.
and even asking, I asked directly to the inmate, hey, do you want to give me your C file, which is your central file in prison, and it
Hmm.
might have some of your psych evals, and they were like, well, I do, and I will, but I don't want it to ruin my chance of parole, and I really think I'm on a cushy deal here with this Franklin hearing, and I'm being really flippant here, but stay with me. There are so many school shooters in America, but 4 in particular in California, who are very excited about the Franklin hearings. Very,
Yeah. Well,
very excited.
they're getting the opportunity to potentially parole out earlier,
Yeah.
with these
What
statutory changes. Yeah.
One of them was serving death row in San Quentin, who's now been moved to Pelican Bay serving life, who now may very well have the possibility of parole. So gone from the hard knock
Yeah.
life to now
Yeah.
quite actually, Pelican Bay is a beautiful prison. It's actually in a lovely part of California.
Oh yeah.
He's got a view of the ocean. And now going from the most evil man in America to possibly walking the streets. Uh, you know,
This
that's a problem.
Well, yeah, let's put context around this. That would not happen in Texas. That would not happen in Florida. That would not. So the statutory schemes in California, the way that we think about crime and punishment in California is likened to kind of the Norway models, and we're moving towards this Norway model of rehabilitation, right? If you're familiar with how, what it looks like in Norway, you can't serve longer than I think 25 years in prison in Norway, even if you commit murder, like mass murder and all that. They have a cap. So
I think
California
there's a
is
bit of
moving towards this.
I think there's a bit of hocus pocus in that. Actually,
Okay.
I've had the opportunity to go to Norway and not necessarily study it closely, but there is a bit of hocus pocus. I think the parameters are not the same. I'm being harsh on this because
Yeah.
I'm not in favor of deciding that everything is much better in the Nordic countries and we're just going to replicate that. I'm not a fan of
Right.
this because our parameters are very different. Borders
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
makes
Yeah.
we often look, and even in the UK, we often look to these countries and say, "Oh, they've got it all nailed because they lead on all these statistics."
No,
I don't know.
homogeneous population. Yeah, it's a completely
It's
different
not the same.
population.
It's
Yeah.
not the
No.
same thing. Sorry to butt in and steal
No.
that, but I had to sort of, as a historical
Well, yeah,
standpoint.
I bring it up because it's like this, and I don't want to get political, but in California, there is this push to rethink. So San Quentin, you mentioned San Quentin, that's where the death row used to be. So
Mhm.
it's not called a prison anymore. It's now a rehabilitation center. So they're remaking the model of well, not punishment but rehabilitation. And while I think in theory that is good, we
Mhm.
still need to do a better job of figuring out who actually is amenable to rehabilitation, because there are some people who are not, and those people need to be locked up for the rest of their lives. They're not going to change. They're dangerous. They're even dangerous to the prison community as well. And
I think you're spot on.
so I mean,
Correct. I think you're absolutely
yeah,
spot on there, and that is
yeah,
from a historical standpoint. And of course, in Texas, they just have the expression "he's a wrongin',"
yeah. Texas doesn't mess around, man.
and
There's like,
that's almost like legal governance. He's just a wrongin', you know. Um,
that's wrong.
it's true, isn't it? In small
Yeah,
towns
no, it is.
in the world, people just say, "Well, he's a wrongin'," and that's that. Throw him away, lock
Right.
up the key before they hurt
They're
anybody
like,
else.
yeah, he's not going to change, and that's it's a simplified way of basically saying that, what, this person's not amenable to change. Okay, I get that it's idealistic to think that, like, oh well, every human is capable of change. It is such a naive assumption to make that that's possible. We know that from extensive research on psychopathy, and it's actually a little more. Well, it's the base rates are low. It's 1% of the on average. 1% of the population would meet criteria, but that's a lot of people when you think about it. If you're talking 1% of the U.S. population, that's 3.4 million, 3.5 million people who meet
Yeah, and
criteria for psychopathy.
yeah, and we joke about this because 1% of the U.S. population is the size of New Zealand, right?
Yeah, right.
And New Zealand is one of the best rugby teams in the world. And I've always argued that if 1% of America played rugby, right, in theory, in the
Yeah,
law of averages,
right.
we could be as good as New Zealand at rugby,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
So we joke about it like those terms, and I often use that kind of analogy
Yeah.
within crime. And it's interesting that you brought up as well, because I think you're spot on. My worry about this prisoner that was moved, and you've really hit the nail on the head, because they've moved somebody who could very well be on parole out of a rehabilitation center
Mm-hmm.
and into another prison that's programs. And when we say programs, these are the educational programs that people do
Correct.
within prisons, right?
Right.
They're reducing their budget for programming.
Correct.
So he's now moved from what is going to be a rehabilitation center into another prison that is not going to rehabilitate him. So, okay, you get what I'm saying here.
Oh yeah.
If they want him to get out, and it looks like that's what they want, you're not giving us a fighting chance here, because
Yeah.
he's going to come out without the rehabilitation qualifications or programs or marketable. He's going to get out and he'll be in his 50s, which means he'll have to work.
Mm-hmm.
So he becomes what then? A ward of the state, and all of a sudden the state of California keeps him in a halfway house. So I don't know how this works.
Yeah. Well.
It seems a mystery. It seems hocus pocus to
Yeah.
me.
Transitional. I mean, they put people in transitional housing, and then they give them some supports, but then generally that drops off. They have parole agents they have to check in with, and
Well, the Manson sisters
it's
aren't working at McDonald's.
yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
That maybe she has a warehouse job. I mean, she's 70, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
But wherever she is, it must be cheaper than keeping her in the. You get what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
You agree with
Yeah.
me? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I know. We just stop and smile at that. Dana, you're on mute. Sorry.
Dana,
Yeah.
you're muted.
Oh, yeah. In California, I feel like people don't think about this. I mean, we're thinking about it a lot, but these people get out.
Mm.
The, and they don't really have any marketable job skills. And also, did you learn anything new while you had your time out while you're in?
Yeah.
And that's a problem because we see them repeatedly We see the same ones back in jail,
Yeah.
in and out of prison. I see people and they're sometimes they commit new crimes just to go back to prison.
Yeah. We call that the
Um,
installment plan. Brenda jokes about this in prison. I paid it off in one sum. Other people do it by installments, and it's really crass. But this is how criminals
wow.
speak. They make it
Yeah, they
a
just
jovial conversation. I mean, I like to think that they do that because they can't uh, understand the crimes they committed and they're struggling with their own reality, whatever. But it isn't actually. They are just that crass, and they just say it like it is sometimes, and there is something refreshing about it. But the ones that go in on the installment plan for me are sometimes more vicious than the ones who are on life, and that might be
well, yeah,
because
and they cause
they
more damage to communities, yeah, and
yeah.
society generally, right? Because they're
So I don't know where we
re-victimizing
are.
people.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Anyway, it's an interesting conversation, and
Oh yeah.
you know, school shooting thing is worse now than ever.
Hmm.
I'm slightly concerned in what I've been, in my studies lately, as well as the transgender population and school shootings. There's now a strong connection with that. I don't know. Again, historically, it might just be the change of attitudes towards the change of younger people today, and that might just be horses for courses. Sorry for again that's just the change of the way children are today within the accessibility and acknowledgement of change of gender. That might be nothing, but certainly of the last big publicized school shootings in the United States.
Yeah,
The
that's definitely been a
the
variable
gender
that
issue has yeah,
yeah, it's coming up as an of interest. Yeah, we don't have enough data on it yet. But I think that's something that is ripe for study. Right, we need to look at that more carefully just to see what's going on there.
and, from the UK, and again, being a surrogate San Diegan, I look at that and I feel that politics is playing a role, and I worry about whether we're gonna get accurate studies on this. And I know it. Look, maybe I'm being a bit, maybe I read X too much, but I'm not getting the information from those school shootings than I get from other school shootings that were just as publicized. As someone who asks for freedom of information requests, who speaks to sheriff departments, who even writes the FBI and gets information, I'm getting very little information about what happened in Memphis. You know what happened in Colorado. I'm getting very censored information back as opposed to events that happened in Oregon, events that happened in Florida. And I really hope the politics isn't playing there because I, in trying to study this or understand it, I don't know if you guys are even going to get close to really
Yeah, you need
digging in on
transparency.
it.
Yeah, that's yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's tough, and even like just a real quick parallel, like trying to study, to study prisoners in prisons, just in California as an example, very difficult to get access to the prison population, do any research. I'm developing a suicide risk scale for correctional settings, and trying to get access to even the staff just to validate the scale, and I can't get access. It's there's just barriers in place, and it's political. A lot of it is
Yeah,
political.
and how can you staff turnover in prisons must be enormous.
Oh, it's tremendously high. Yes,
How would you
yes.
even begin to study that? You probably start a session with someone and they've quit the next month, right?
Yeah, and some of them quit in the first. I've had when I was at the prison. It's called SAC. That's the maximum security prison in Folsom. There's two prisons there. The Johnny
Mhm.
Cash one is the old, the old one built the 1800s. The new one's across the road. Anyway, I've had psychologists when I ran the crisis bed unit. Like they hire new psychologists, and on Monday they start, and by Friday they've resigned. They're there for 5 days, and they're like, I'm out of here. I can't deal with this.
How the training budgets must be. I mean,
Oh,
that's incredible.
it's the money spent in training and just continuous the turnover. It's very costly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and they have to pay top dollar, and it's just because there's high burnout. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved, and I don't know what the prisons. Obviously prison systems in other states are very different, but
well, I would say to you that UK is suffering the same. It's almost identical.
yeah, I would
We're
say I would
very,
not be
very
surprised.
similar situation.
Yeah.
It's incredible, and subcontracting to certain companies that run certain prisons, and then when you get into that medical institution piece, um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, Britain is in a struggle, probably very similar to most of American states. It's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
We again
Uh,
going back to it, we don't have the school shooter issue.
You don't, because you don't have access to all the firearms. I mean, that's the variable, right?
But
But you have lots of knives,
we have just as
and you
many
have
bad people. We have just as
yeah,
many
you still
bad
have just
people
as
in
many bad
prisons. Yeah,
people, and you have cars,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
you have people that can make bombs and do other things. So yeah,
yeah,
it's it's not the mechanism necessarily. It's the we have to look at the psychology of the people that are doing this.
yeah, yeah. So come February, Brenda's got her parole hearing.
Mm.
Um, she's really ready for it this time. She a couple years back, she just going into her last parole, she decided to take a 3 year stipulation, a 3 year stip as they call it, which is where someone can say, "I'm not ready for this parole hearing, but I'd like to have another one before my next term," and they make
Right.
sort of it's like a plea bargain, I guess. I mean, I'm explaining that. I'm sure you guys
Yeah.
know what that
It's
is.
administrative, but they can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could say, "Hey, look, I'm not ready for this parole hearing," and then she's going to take a little bit of a break to get ready. Um, she's asked me to write a letter of recommendation. So she's thinking in those thoughts. I've agreed to write what I think, and it will essentially be something like, you know, if you want to keep her in prison for retribution, or do you want to keep her in prison for rehabilitation? But if we're going to look at it as threat to society, she's an old obese lady who can barely see and doesn't even have her own teeth. Look at her. You tell me.
Yeah.
As a San Diegan, rotten hell. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What you did, you were old enough to know better, and you knew what you were doing. But then there's that side of me of like, hold on a second, really, who's she going to hurt? But then I go back again. Hold on, what if she does get out and kill
Yeah.
someone or hurt somebody, or
Right.
does end up injuring a dog? I would. So I I've written this whole book. I've studied her for years, and I still speak to her on occasions by email, and I'm still no closer to the answer on this one. And even morally, I struggle with. Hold on, you know, she's a wrongin.
We have the same problem. Yeah, exactly. We have the same thing when we're doing. Before anyone gets is eligible for parole, that when they go through this process, they do get a risk assessment, and so we do those. And even when I'm doing risk assessments, even though we're using a structured professional judgment, we're using data. Oftentimes I err on the side of caution. Generally, if somebody has, like in this case, if there's any probability that I think is enough to suggest that there's a potential risk, of violent reoffending. Generally, as a psychologist, I classify that person as high risk, and I don't know if Dana does the same, but we have different way we classify people low, moderate, or high when we do these assessments, and we use a lot of data. We're trying to be objective, obviously, and informed in the way we do it, but it's not an exact science because I can't precisely predict whether or not someone is. It's all probabilities, and so we use probability models, right, from these instruments, and they're not precise. So we could say someone's moderate or low risk, and then the court, the judge then releases this person, and then boom, they go out and do something, right? And it's like, and
And
then, and then it's like,
how would you begin to calibrate that data when there just isn't enough? They haven't run enough programs. They haven't been.
yeah,
They
it's
haven't.
hard
How would you
because we just
begin?
don't have, yeah. And there's so much, everyone's unique, right? So everyone's
Mm,
situation's unique, and in terms of their psychological functioning and all the stuff that has happened to them and all of this stuff. And so that's why it's not a precise science on our side either. So I know how you're struggling with this from that
mm.
moral, like kind of thinking about it from a moral perspective. But us as forensic psychologists, we have the same struggle, even though we're using scientifically informed procedures or protocols. It's not exact for us, and so it comes down to a judgment. At some point we have to make that classification judgment. The judge generally will agree with us. I've had a couple times where the judge hasn't agreed with me. I've said high risk, and the judge didn't agree, and in some cases they have the ultimate authority to then just release that person. And so that's their, that's
When
the
sorry to challenge you.
judges.
This is fascinating. So when you say judge, is that the head of the board of the
Yeah,
panel?
so in the context of a parole hearing, it would be the parole board. So I was
Right.
speaking to a risk assessment, say in a context of someone being civilly committed. Say they were found not guilty by reason of insanity, and now the DA is pursuing a civil commitment because this person is presumed violent. So they need a risk assessment for this, and so then the psychologist does that risk assessment and then offers an opinion about that level of risk. generally the courts will agree with that. And the parole board does the same thing. They look at the risk assessment, they consider it, they weigh it, they look at all these other factors, right? It's multifactorial. And then they arrive at a decision, right, about whether to grant or not. And so it's similar, except in a parole process, it's administrative. It's an administrative law process versus, like what I was speaking to is more of a procedural issue that happens, say at a superior court, in the it's not called the
Yeah.
Crown Courts in the UK. What is it called? Is it called the Crown
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
UK? Okay,
Yeah.
I was right. It's the Crown.
You have magistrates and
So
crown court. So one is
Crown.
sort of from the Queen, and magistrate court might handle a lot of the low level stuff. If you've
Okay,
been a
right.
very, very naughty boy, you go to crown court.
You go to Crown Court. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. So
Yeah.
the judge in that, in that context, oftentimes
Yeah.
would probably make that ultimate decision.
So,
So yeah.
Brenda, in her parole hearings, which is an interesting side note, and when she plea bargained 25 to life instead of life, which is a very different deal, she made kind of a verbal agreement that she would stay in juvenile hall till she was 21 and would go to prison when she was 18. And that was kind of a verbal agreement that was made. It's well noted in the newspapers. There's even some video from the local reporters where the prosecutor says it. We've made that deal and we think that's fair. She'll plea a bargain, saving us time, blah, blah, blah. On her 18th birthday, she was shifted from juvenile hall straight to the California Institution for Women, right? In Chowchilla then, or Corona. Not observing anything the court had agreed or had whatever. And we so quickly discovered in a story of her life that the penal institutions have no reason at all to observe anything the court decides, right? So when she goes to parole hearings, every head of the panel has been from San Diego, her hometown. Okay,
Yeah, that's
so which I'm not saying. Look, it is what it is, and I know that a lot of people who from the military have a San Diego connection, and a lot of
pretty
these people from
conservative too. The county's pretty conservative, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how conservative can
Well,
you get in California?
I know
So,
relative to the rest of California, I
relative.
should say.
So, that has really been an interesting thing is that every one of them has had some connection to San Diego through the military, through their training, or even some grew up there. So Brenda and I have joked about the fact that let's hope the person on the panel isn't from San Diego.
Yeah.
Right.
So if they're from San Francisco or Marin County.
Okay. Yeah. That's anybody from Northern California. I know what you're talking about, but I think I don't think that's impartial. Because her trial happened in Santa Ana, or the would-be trial, the
change,
hearing, because of the impartiality and I what people know and that just wouldn't happen in the court. Whereas in the penal institutions, you tell me if I'm wrong, but it's the Wild West. Someone from Britain looking at it, it really is the Wild West out there, and you could almost roll the dice. And I think as long as one of her victims keeps attending, and there is one of her victims named Cam Miller, who's a very respectful citizen in San Diego, great guy. He's a parole officer now in San Diego and went into law enforcement because, well, not a surprise, right? I mean, his childhood was changed forever. And he makes sure that he attends, and he's very well spoken. He's articulate, and he makes the difference. And I think he's there for all the victims, and rightly so. I'm not sure she'll ever be released as long as a victim goes to speak to the judge or the panel. I think that is persuasive evidence that even if she was the shining star, I just don't see it. And I think the reason why I could be totally wrong, but the Manson sisters have been granted parole, and one of them is already out. Who are the victims anymore? This is so long ago. It's like life moves on. People forget. But there is one victim. There's a victim of Brenda's who was shot by her who did not forget and will not forget. And I think that will probably keep her in prison. But I don't know. Again.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I'm just talking.
No, that's persuasive. I mean, that is persuasive. And the board does list, they do, those victim impact statements they're weighted. Definitely. Those are weighted in those decisions.
Yeah. So that's again, a side note. Sorry, Dana, go ahead.
Yeah. And the board doesn't have, they're not going to be motivated to say yes. They have the ultimate power to say no.
Yeah. And I think they would not be wrong in saying no. I mean, in my opinion, because there's so much evidence to suggest that
Yeah.
she could still hold a weapon. I just don't know if she got it in her. If it's money, if it's dollars and cents, let her out. You know, I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't.
we,
But
we
then
say
again,
we also say that, like, if someone is antisocial, a lot of time generally they age out. What I mean by that is, someone who maybe is antisocial in their 20s and 30s and even 40s, once they start getting into their 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, they age out of this. In other words, that antisocial, those behaviors tend to diminish over time.
mm,
And anyway, that's one of the factors that's looked at as well.
yeah.
Not
Boy,
always.
I hope we got close to this issue. I don't know. I felt like we got
Oh,
around the
wow.
houses there. I'm sorry if I rambled, but it's fascinating to talk to you guys and actually have that discussion about this because it's not that often. And in the research for my book, I got so many differing opinions. It's nice to actually get an hour with you and actually ask some questions. So that's brilliant. Thank you for having me.
So
That was great.
I'm still digesting all the
I
information
know.
you gave me earlier. I'm like, who's it's just, you blew
Yeah.
my mind.
Yeah,
Really,
absolutely.
I had no idea the story goes
Yeah.
on.
You
But
know
I
what?
need you to
Yeah, go ahead.
come back
I love it.
and
Love it. Love it. I've got lots of other
because
stories of different shooters we've spoken to and their stories. But sorry, as a closing piece, I'm sorry to do this, but blanketing with information is kind of my thing. Um, in 1980, all of this information was available. There is nothing I've said today other than the Broderick connections and those things. Um, it happened in 1980. All of this was available, and no one's touched it for 44 years.
I know, that is incredible.
And I just feel there's something, if we all knew this truth, I don't know. I just think parents or law enforcement or even psychologists who are on their last day at work who can't take it anymore would go, hold on, this is similar to
Yeah.
that. Maybe they could. I just don't know, but it annoys me that somebody like me, I'm now 6,000 miles away from where I was as a child, writing this story that nobody else wants to tell. And it fascinates me that sometimes you have to get that 40-year clarity on something to look back and go, God, we missed that one, Sorry, there you go. That's my closing piece. I'm done now. I got all excited there, but I just feel there's so many other connections here, and it really frustrates me. And if I were a psychologist, I would probably be pulling my hair out over this. So,
Oh,
I
we would love to be able to, do a deep dive into the, into the psychology of her. But, again,
well, maybe
that's,
one day you can meet her. You know, um,
yeah, if she's released, right? We
you never
have
know.
her on the, yeah, you never know.
I've asked her, if you don't get parole in February, perhaps maybe telling your story, to the national media or to, in some interview, I'll interview you. Perhaps
Hmm.
maybe telling the truth, because that's, she still claims she was on drugs and didn't remember the moment she shot children, which to me is a lie.
We
bec-
we hear that a lot, by the way, from defendants, that it's this. I can't recall. I don't remember what happened. I have
yeah,
amnesia. I've got a case right now where that was just said to me, and I said, okay, well, we're going to do some. We'll dive into that because we have ways of determining if that's real or
yeah.
not. But yeah.
So, I'm saying to her, hey, look, if you don't get out in February, and I don't think she will, maybe it's time to come clean. And if you want to come
Mhm.
clean, I'll bring you guys with me. We'll drive down to Corona and we'll speak with her and say, Brenda, time to fast. Um, you know, will she? Probably not. But you know what? I've been her friend for a long time now, and I've actually told her story better than anyone else could tell her story. I've got people listening to this 45-year-old tale that's fascinating. And if anybody's going to be, sympathetic to her, it's going to be somebody who read my book or, or understand, or someone who's been in a situation like hers, or spoken to people in that situation. I don't, but she isn't telling the truth, and it's time to maybe just now tell the truth and give yourself some type of redemption to your God or to whatever it is you believe in. And she's not doing that, and that's what makes her very different from other school shooters. The ones that I have spoken to tend to be very remorseful, some truthful, some a bit more lip service. But Brenda isn't either of those. She's a bit, you know,
Yeah.
and who's she protecting? Nobody. She's not helping the victims. She's not helping herself. So there. Got so much to tell you guys. Oh my god, I've got so
Yeah.
much to tell you.
Wow.
I'm here for this. I
Yeah.
wanna I'm
Fascinating.
down to
Yeah.
talk to Brenda, and I definitely wanna hear about some of the other cases you're working on that we didn't get into, um, that you're working on right now, the possible wrong conviction of Amanda Lewis in Florida,
Yeah. Yeah.
the, Cokeville, Wyoming school
Yep.
crisis, and Craig Price, the youngest serial killer convicted in the United States. So I know that you have some very detailed information that is why I
Yeah.
really enjoyed talking to you, all of this
Now that would be
detail.
one. That would be one. And Dana, Craig would absolutely love you. By the way,
Craig would love me?
absolutely.
That's not me, Craig. The other
Oh,
Craig.
Craig!
Sorry,
I
sorry,
was like,
sorry.
why
Yeah, not you.
You're
Oh my gosh.
ah!
because
No,
this guest is
which
gonna be
Craig?
okay,
Sorry.
the serial killer Craig Price would
Yeah,
love
yeah,
me, and why? Why would he love me?
yeah. Well,
The listening
he
ear?
yes. Also, your look. Craig is very clear about who I want to tell my story to.
Ah.
He's very clear.
Okay,
And
so
he was 13 when he committed his first crime. He was 15 when he did his multiple murders. He is articulate. He is also enormous. He's a big, strong, healthy guy. He enjoys weightlifting in prison. He hasn't been on any programs. He has served his time for the murders. He is now finishing his 20-year sentence for attempted murder on a cellmate. Every time Craig gets close to being released, he misbehaves and gets more time. He believes it's racism. He's been moved from Rhode Island to Florida because Rhode Island didn't have a facility that could hold someone like Craig. Craig is, and you know what? He's a jovial guy. He is a killer, but it is the first time that I've ever spoken to someone who's a murderer, and I've spoken to a few, judge me if you will, who I've actually gone, whoa, that's spooky. Like I
Yeah.
don't know if you guys
Hairs on
had
the back of your
have you
neck. Yeah.
have you had that where you've
Oh
been
yeah. Well,
okay.
I work with
I don't know.
serial killers in the prison. Oh yeah, and you get it right away. I mean, I pick it up right away. What you're experiencing is that cold, calculated, psychopathic
Yeah, and you
architecture.
realize they're
Yeah.
trying to mold you into,
Yes.
I don't know if I want this bit to be put out, although I don't think his people will know we're talking about it because it's not the subject. But if Craig Craig knew that I was speaking about him in these terms, it might change our relationship.
Mhm.
understand
But
that.
yeah, but he is, and I'll just say it now, and you guys can edit this out, do what you want with it. He is the spookiest individual I've ever spoken with. And I've spoken to some like you know what I'm talking about. And I think you guys are the professionals. I'm just a guy who looks at history, and even when he's talking to me, I'm kind of writing down the historical fact of the moments, speaking to him about moment by moment. You're in this house at midnight with a knife, right? And he's telling me, and I had to put my pen down and go, whoa, you know, the honesty in which he speaks and the way he talks about it. I just shiver. And I went downstairs and my wife was watching telly and I said, I need to take a break. We need to go for a walk. Let's get a puppy. I'm and I've you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Oh yeah.
Like, wow. I think about John Wayne Gacy's lawyers where he comes in and they're financial lawyers and real estate lawyers, and he comes into their office on the night that he's just about to be arrested and he lays on their couch and tells them the truth. And the two of them go, call the police. I felt like it was wow. Wow. You guys, we should talk about him because he is fascinating. Fascinating. And nobody wants to tell the story because the victims it is horrible. And the victims are like, no, don't want to talk about him, don't want to give him press. We don't want him to be like Bundy and Dahmer and Gacy. We don't want him to be the next, Golden State Killer. We don't want to see his face on telly, you know? And they don't want to talk to me. They don't want there to be a book. They don't want there to be documentaries. So whenever I even get close, and they've got protection from the guys in the the Boston television or in there's a wonderful writer from the Boston Globe called Mark Arcelot who wrote about him. Wonderful writer. He's very much like, I want to tell this story because it's a really good story, but on the other hand, the victims do not want me to, and I'm not going to, because they the ones who should be respected here. So I'm kind of out of my league, guys, with Craig. Do you know what I mean? As a
So
historian, it's like I'm just kind of out of my league. I might. Well, let's talk. Let's talk. He's just so fascinating. Anyway, sorry, I went
so
off on one, but there you go.
so Craig
Yeah.
Price, would he want to come on the podcast?
I don't know if we could do that. It's possible. It's
Prison phone
possible.
call.
Well, we do videos.
Oh, so you can do, yeah. They probably do have video.
It's possible. Yeah, they do video.
Chats.
It's
Yeah.
possible. Let's talk off. Let's talk offline.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't know. You guys, the morality of this doesn't sit well with me. I'll be honest.
Mm.
Well, yeah, if the victims, that's one of the considerations obviously is the victims, right? In
I
terms
think
of,
is it.
being re-traumatized or, when something gets out into the popular media and that kind of stuff, it's something
Let
to think
me
about.
let me do this, Dana. Uh, uh, let me see if I can put together a little, maybe a video piece of him and I just chatting,
Mhm.
and you can see what I'm talking about. This guy is exactly what was described to me as a child as the boogeyman. Okay, he is he is a 6'2" black man, about 250 pounds, pure muscle. He is exactly what was described by modern media as a bad guy. Exactly. Not the handsome perpetrator as Bundy, not the unassuming, chocolate factory worker
Casey.
in
Yeah.
Dahmer, or the KFC manager, or the construction. He is exactly as you think. Like when you go, what is the stereotypical bad guy? And when you talk to him, there's this point where he was talking and his hands went up to the microphone or up to the camera. And my brain went, those are the hands that held the knife that stabbed children. And I had to pause. I said, Craig, I don't know. It just got to me. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's emotive stuff. And it's
Yeah.
emotive. And I wouldn't want to be the victims' families. And I don't want to be the guy who makes him famous again.
Mm.
But on the other hand, I'm out of my depth with him, guys. You should speak to him because he's fascinating. And he's certain that it's racism. And he's clear that the Lord tells him he should be out of prison now. And I want you to watch this movie. And that tells my story better than anything. And it's just, came from a great home. His parents were really good people. His sister is a really productive part of society. There was no reason that he should have ever committed these crimes. The FBI said
Well,
it was a white guy who lived in the neighborhood. It'd have to be
Yeah,
a
their
white
profile
person.
got it wrong. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, that's
miles away. They
yeah,
weren't even
yeah,
close to it. It wasn't
yeah.
a guy who was 25 years old with a red car and brown hair, brown eyes, the typical, who looked like me, right? It wasn't me. It was a 13-year-old who lived next door. Just wow. Okay.
Mm,
Guys, you got
yeah.
me started, man. Stop it. You get me started on these
well,
things.
we
I
keep
mean,
getting you restarted, right? Like
it's just
each day
fascinating about it. It's
we got to
fascinating.
wind it down. But
Yeah.
conversations with us directly can help us really understand what someone's psychopathology is. Speaking directly to them, what can we learn? What can they tell us? Um, it certainly would be fascinating. So, thank you so
Thanks,
much
Becky.
for
Thank you for having
your
me.
time today. It was just fascinating. Your wealth of information, and um, I really appreciate. I can't wait to have you back and hear more stories from you. Um, Thank you.
No, it's great to be here. And I'm here in the UK, and it's almost past my bedtime. So maybe
Yeah.
I'm just a bit drowsy. Maybe that's why I've carried on too much. But guys, thanks for having me. I'll come back again soon. I'll let you know what I'm up to, and I'll share whatever I can with you. And don't be strangers. Email me, message me. I'll see you on social medias, and we'll keep in touch. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks for listening, Killer Psychologist. For episode details and merch, check out killerpsychologistpodcast.com. And for forensic services, you can book online at psychologydr.com. That's psychologydoctor.com.